Hey, welcome back. I'm Jessica with Flock and Farmstead, and this is the perfect time of year to start thinking about building your first dairy sheep flock. Spring is just around the corner, and even though it is only February, we know how fast time flies. So here are 5 reasons why spring is the perfect time to build a flock. So the first reason is that sheep are pregnant and lamb typically in the springtime, at least here in the US. And so it's going to be the perfect time for finding either a pregnant ewe, which is the female sheep, or one who has just recently lambed, and you can chickens, and you can bring that you can bring that ewe and her lambs home with you. And so then you start right away with a sheep and milk. And if you can do it to find either that pregnant sheep or one who has just lambed, then that's a great way to not only be new to sheep, but also be new to lambing. You can kind of avoid that, which is what I did with my very first ewe that I got. I met her when she was still pregnant, waited until she had lambed at her previous farm, and then went to pick her and the lambs up when they were just a few days old. I worked that out with the seller, and it worked out great for everybody because we didn't have to bring home this sheep that was totally new to us, and then weeks later she's giving birth, which is a new experience for us. We'll be going through our first lambings this spring. And so if you can, like I said, if you can find either a pregnant ewe and jump right into lambing, or preferably a ewe who has just given birth and bring the ewe and lambs home, this is the time of year to do it. Sheep typically mate in the fall, and then they have their babies in the springtime, anywhere from January to May or so, depending on when they bred the year before. So this is a great time to start looking at livestock groups on Facebook in your area, maybe Craigslist, word of mouth if there are sheep farms in your area and you want to get started with just whatever is available locally. This is a great time to do it. Bringing home either that pregnant or newly lambed sheep is also a great way to segue right into getting some milk. So that way you're not holding on to this animal for months and months, or worst case, a year before you get that return milk production out of them. I mean, which is important considering that you're starting a dairy flock, intentionally to get some dairy for your kitchen, not just to have sheep as pets. So bringing home that ewe, this is one of my other reasons, if she has her lambs in particular, is a great way to ease the burden of milking and the pressure of it, because once you have a dairy animal, I think we kind of all have that idea of you need to be home consistently to milk them. And if there is no lamb there to help with that, or calf or kid, depending on what animal you're thinking about, this is very true. You would typically need to milk twice a day. Every day you can't miss, because otherwise they have an overproduction of milk. Their udder is uncomfortable. That can lead to all kinds of things like mastitis, which is a non-fatal disease, but still nothing that you want to mess with because it can damage the udder. It can make the animal sick. You can't drink the milk. So it's best to avoid it altogether. And so if you have those lambs and you're doing what's called lamb sharing, then you can milk, say, in the morning, and then the lambs are with the ewe for the rest of the day, and then you separate at night, you milk again in the morning, you reconvene the lambs with the mom, and they take care of the excess milk supply. And lambs are not typically available in the fall. It can be done. There are ways to get your sheep bred in the spring, which is a little bit out of sync with what they naturally do. But when lambs are plentiful in the springtime, that makes it another reason to, in particular, look now at this time of year so that you can find that magical ewe and lamb combo to ease your way into your first flock. It has not escaped me that my cow is standing there in the background. As always, she is waiting to see if she's going to get any food. Never mind that I just fed her, and she's got a full hay feeder over on her side of the barn. She just likes the company, I suppose. And she is pregnant too, hence the big round tummy that she's got on her. She's not due for about 4 more months. But yeah, she's apparently my little companion right now. Alrighty, so the third reason why spring is a great time to build your first dairy sheep flock is that your weather, hopefully, is starting to improve. Granted, it's February, it's cold here, it's gloomy, it's been snowing off and on, but in just another month or so, the days are going to be that much longer. The rain, while still prevalent, is going to be countered by those longer days, and the grass is going to start picking up its growth again after the winter dormancy, which means that pasture and feed is going to be very plentiful for these sheep, which in my mind is more straightforward and simple. Of, I put my sheep out on pasture, they're going to eat the grass. That is a little bit less intimidating than how much hay do they need, how much grain do they need, and you may still need to supplement those things even when your sheep are on pasture out on the grass. But to me, it's kind of a backup method to make sure that they're getting what they need, because they are grazers. They are out on the grass getting what they need, self-selecting the plants and the weeds and stuff to meet their nutritional needs and their medicinal needs. Even some weeds can really help with their overall health, we'll say. Getting a sheep in the wintertime when there is very little grass growing, or it's muddy, or the days are really short, and so you're doing your chores in the morning in the dark, at night in the dark, especially if you're, bookending a full-time job with your animals, it can be a little bit of a cold and miserable way to start. And so that hopefulness of spring, the longer days of spring, in addition to the grasses growing, that just to me seems like a much gentler foray into backyard dairy production than the dead of winter, say November going into December. Okay, so I touched on it just a little bit before, but your grass is going to be growing like crazy come springtime, which will make it really easy to be able to move your sheep from paddock to paddock throughout the weeks and months of spring without worrying, am I leaving this sheep in here too long and the grass is getting too short? Or, do they have enough food to eat for the day that I've got them in here? And if you're not familiar with what I mean when I'm talking about moving them over the course of the weeks or months, or having a new paddock, we're going to get into that. That is rotational grazing, where you kind of simulate nature, or the wild, I guess, where in the wild sheep would eat. They would walk a little, they'd eat some more, they'd walk a little, they'd eat some more, and that's not really the way it's done on most farms these days. Instead, they just have a big field and they go out and they eat, but those four sides of the field are what they have. Whereas with rotational grazing, you give them a small paddock, let them eat that for the day. The next day, you give them another small paddock, move them the next day, give them another small paddock, and that keeps them on fresh grass each day. There's more to it than that, but that's just the basic overview. And it is way easier to get started with that in the springtime than in the winter, where one square of sad, dormant grass kind of looks the same as the other, and it's a lot more difficult to judge how much space do they need? Are they going to get the food that they need in that paddock? And so in any case, springtime is just way easier because the grass is growing so much more quickly, and there's an abundance of space to move your sheep to. Okay, and then the last thing I'll say about feeding and why spring is a great time to start your flock is that you don't have to buy hay right away if you have enough pasture or the grass is growing quickly. So I know I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago that I still feed some hay and grain in the springtime, even when they're out on pasture. But you can pick up a bale here, a bale there, get a small pile. You don't need to get your whole big winter stock all at once, because maybe you don't have anywhere to put that just yet, or you are, the sheep were one financial investment, and then the hay for the winter is going to be another financial investment, and you can space those out a little bit rather than having those big lump sums back to back. So the hay can wait until you've been at it for a little bit, and you're not buying hay in the middle of winter when it's going to be more expensive, and instead you can catch that summer crop when it is most likely at its lowest price because it's coming fresh out of the field. The last reason, and it turns out it's number 6, not 5, is that having those lambs is a really quick way to build your flock on a budget. So most ewes, if they are good quality dairy ewes, are going to sell for at least $400. Female lambs, the ewe lambs, can go anywhere from $200 to $400 as well, and the adult ewes can be well over $400, $600, $1,000. It just depends on their history, their lineage, their milk production, their age, all that good stuff. But you can assume you'll spend at least $400 on a good ewe. So if you are buying a ewe who is pregnant, then you have those lambs kind of as a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1, Whereas if you buy one ewe here, another ewe there, and a third ewe there, then you are potentially spending $400 for each of those as opposed to just the one. And a pregnant ewe will probably cost a little bit more than a non-pregnant ewe because the seller knows you're going to get those lambs. But it's still a cheaper way to start your flock by keeping those lambs that are either born on your property or that you are picking up alongside the ewe, like I did with mine. So I bought that ewe with her 2 babies. One was a female, and we still have her, Nora. You met her in the last video. And one was a ram, and we did castrate him. We have since butchered him, which is a whole other story on what to do with your male sheep. So he's no longer with the flock. And then I bought one other ewe who is due to lamb any day now. And that was a case of buying an adult ewe who was not pregnant and not in milk, and so she was a little less expensive as a way to keep building up my flock, knowing that eventually I would get lambs out of her that would also join our flock. So all of these scenarios are best carried out in the spring when it's breeding season, lambs are in abundance, and you have plenty of pasture and good weather to get your flock out there and feed them. Obviously, you can build your flock any time of year. Spring is just a little bit easier to do. If you aren't sure yet if sheep are the right animal for you, just based off of what I have said, the last video was comparing goats, sheep, and cows for your first or maybe favorite dairy animal. I've had all 3. Each have pros and cons. I definitely have my favorites. And so you can jump back to that video if you want to see what are the arguments for each of those very common dairy animals, especially for small acreage. Bye.